I'm Ethan Mitchell, 32, and until last year, I thought I had the perfect family. Then my sister Samantha decided to frame me as a thief, turning everyone I loved against me overnight. They called me a disgrace, blocked my calls, and erased me from their lives. Now they're facing serious IRS investigations because of what she did, and suddenly they're begging for my forgiveness. Funny how the truth has a way of coming out, isn't it? Before I dive into how my own sister destroyed my reputation, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I believed we were the definition of a close-knit family. My parents, Harold and Linda Mitchell, weren't wealthy, but they provided a stable middle-class life for my sister Samantha and me. Dad worked as an accountant at a local firm, while Mom taught third grade at the elementary school 10 minutes from our suburban home. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house with a small backyard where Dad would grill every Sunday during summer, and we'd eat together on the back patio, laughing about our week. From the beginning, there was always something special about Sam. 3 years younger than me, she somehow managed to capture everyone's attention without even trying. While I struggled through school, working hard for every A, Sam breezed through with natural charm and intelligence. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. "Sam's just gifted," Mom would say whenever I complained about the difference in how we were treated. "You've got other strengths, Ethan." Those other strengths meant I was praised for being reliable and hardworking, not exactly the compliments a kid wants to hear. Meanwhile, Sam's mediocre achievements were celebrated like Olympic victories. When she got a B+ on a science project she'd thrown together the night before, there was ice cream and celebration. When I made honor roll after studying for weeks, I got a pat on the back and a "That's what we expect from you." Don't get me wrong, my parents loved me. They just loved Sam differently. More completely. More blindly. Despite this imbalance, I adored my little sister growing up. She had this infectious laugh and boundless energy that made her impossible not to love. We'd build elaborate forts in the living room, ride bikes through the neighborhood until sunset, and stay up late watching scary movies when our parents were out. These are the memories I clung to when everything fell apart. As we grew older, the golden child dynamic intensified. I chose to attend our state university, majoring in computer science. I worked part-time jobs to help with expenses, determined to minimize student loans. Sam, meanwhile, insisted on an expensive private college across the country to study marketing, fully funded by our parents who drained a significant portion of their retirement savings to make it happen. "She's following her passion," Dad explained when I questioned the fairness. "You're more practical, Ethan. You understand budgets." After graduation, I landed a job at a tech startup, worked insane hours, and eventually helped build it into a successful company. By 30, I had financial stability, a growing investment portfolio, and enough saved for a down payment on my dream house. Sam, meanwhile, bounced between marketing jobs, never staying anywhere longer than a year, always claiming the companies just didn't appreciate her vision. There were signs of trouble I should have recognized. The way Sam's eyes narrowed when I announced my promotion to senior developer. Her backhanded compliments about my new car. "It's nice to see you finally treating yourself, even if it's not exactly luxury." The subtle ways she would undermine me during family gatherings, bringing up embarrassing childhood stories just as I was sharing professional accomplishments. But family blinds you to the obvious. I dismissed these moments as normal sibling rivalry. I wanted to believe in the sister I remembered from our fort-building days. Our family traditions remained important to me even as an adult. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were non-negotiable. Holiday gatherings brought extended family together, with Mom's legendary turkey at Thanksgiving and Dad's Christmas morning cinnamon rolls. Sam attended these events sporadically, always with an excuse about work demands or travel plans, but was forgiven instantly when she did grace us with her presence. When I purchased my house in a quiet neighborhood just 20 minutes from my parents, they helped me move in and arrange furniture. Mom hung curtains while Dad installed ceiling fans. It was a point of pride for me, something I'd achieved through hard work, and careful planning. A 3-bedroom craftsman with original hardwood floors and a front porch perfect for morning coffee. My sanctuary? I'm proud of you, son, Dad said that day, one of the few times he'd expressed such direct approval. The memory of those words would sustain me through the darkest days to come. Last year, for my 32nd birthday, Mom insisted on hosting a family celebration. Extended family came from across the state: aunts, uncles, cousins. Even Sam showed up, bringing an expensive bottle of scotch she couldn't afford and monopolizing conversations with exaggerated stories about her marketing brilliance. I remember looking around that night at my family gathered in my parents' living room, feeling complete. Mom had baked my favorite chocolate cake. Dad had grilled steaks to perfection. My cousin's kids played with the same board games Sam and I had enjoyed decades earlier. Everything seemed perfect. It was the last time I would feel that sense of belonging for a very long time. The first hint that something was seriously wrong came about a month after my birthday. Sam showed up at Sunday dinner wearing designer clothes and a watch I recognized as costing at least a month of her salary. When Dad complimented it, she vaguely mentioned a bonus at work, though she'd complained just weeks earlier about being underpaid at her marketing coordinator position. This wasn't entirely new behavior. Sam had always lived beyond her means. Her apartment in the trendy part of Portland featured furniture she couldn't afford. Her social media showcased weekend trips to wine country and expensive restaurants. She leased a luxury car despite her modest income. But lately, her spending had accelerated dramatically. "How are you affording all this?" I asked her privately as we did dishes after dinner. She stiffened slightly before flashing her practiced smile. "I'm doing some consulting on the side. Plus, I'm just better with money than you think." I let it drop, not wanting to create tension. That was my first mistake. A week later, Mom called sounding distressed. My grandfather's vintage Rolex, a family heirloom Dad had inherited and kept in his bedside drawer, was missing. It hadn't been worn in years, but Mom had noticed its absence while cleaning. "We're not accusing anyone," she said quickly. "But you were here last weekend helping your father with the garage shelving. Did you happen to see it?" The question took me by surprise. "No, why would I? I haven't been in your bedroom." There was an uncomfortable pause. "Well, it's just strange. It's been there for years and now it's gone. Sam thought maybe you mentioned wanting to have it cleaned or appraised." That was my first clue that Sam was already working to direct suspicion toward me. I later learned she'd casually mentioned to our parents that I'd been asking questions about Dad's watch collection. Something that never happened. My parents didn't explicitly accuse me, but there was a new guardedness in their manner. Subtle changes in behavior that I initially attributed to stress or aging. Dad started keeping his office door locked. Mom would casually confirm when I was leaving after visits, as if checking I wasn't lingering. Meanwhile, Sam's financial issues were becoming more apparent to everyone except our parents. She forgot her wallet during lunch with cousins. She borrowed money from our aunt for emergency car repairs that never seemed to get repaid. She started asking our parents for loans with increasing frequency. "Your sister is going through a rough patch," Mom explained when I questioned why they'd given Sam money for her rent when she just posted photos of a weekend spa getaway. "She's figuring things out. She's 30 years old," I countered. "Maybe it's time she figured out a budget instead." Mom's face hardened. "Not everyone can be as perfect with money as you, Ethan." That conversation revealed the dynamic that would ultimately tear us apart. Any criticism of Sam was viewed as jealousy or self-righteousness on my part. 2 months after the watch disappeared, Mom's diamond earrings went missing, a 10th anniversary gift from Dad that she treasured but only wore on special occasions. Once again, the disappearance mysteriously coincided with one of my visits. I'd stopped by on a Wednesday evening to drop off a birthday gift from my aunt that Mom had agreed to take to her lunch date the following day. "I wore them at Christmas," Mom said, her voice tight with accusation. "Now they're gone. Are you asking if I took them?" I said directly, feeling my face grow hot. Of course not, she replied, not meeting my eyes. It's just very strange. Later that evening, I overheard Sam on the phone in the kitchen. I know, it's concerning, she was saying softly. First Dad's watch, now Mom's earrings. I hate to even think it, but Ethan's the only one who was here both times. And he's been asking a lot of questions about their retirement accounts lately. I had asked exactly one question about their retirement, whether they were still using the financial advisor Dad had mentioned years earlier. It was casual conversation, nothing more. But in Sam's retelling, I was inventorying their valuables. That night, driving home, I called Sam directly. I know what you're doing, I said when she answered. What are you talking about? Her voice was all innocence. The watch, the earrings. Somehow suggesting I'm responsible. She gasped, sounding genuinely offended. That's a horrible accusation, Ethan. I would never. Maybe you should consider why you're so defensive. The gaslighting was so effective I actually spent the drive home questioning my own perception of events. That's how manipulators work. They make you doubt your own reality. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Small valuable items disappeared from my parents' home. Sam would subtly direct suspicion toward me, while simultaneously playing the supportive sister who couldn't believe I would be involved but was concerned about my behavior. My relationship with my parents grew increasingly strained. Conversations became perfunctory. Sunday dinners felt like navigating a minefield. I'd catch them exchanging glances when I excused myself to use the bathroom, as if they were silently communicating their distrust. Sam, meanwhile, continued her financial death spiral. I discovered through a mutual friend that she'd maxed out multiple credit cards. She'd been denied an apartment application due to poor credit. She was desperately seeking cash from any available source, yet still maintained her lavish lifestyle on social media. The final setup before everything imploded came when Mom called to tell me her mother's sapphire necklace, a precious family heirloom intended to be passed down to the first granddaughter, had vanished from her jewelry box after I'd been over for dinner. What she didn't know was that I had left immediately after dessert that night, while Sam had stayed behind to help clean up. I think we need to talk as a family, Mom said, her voice heavy with implied accusation. About what's been happening. That scheduled family talk would become the ambush that changed everything. The family meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at my house, which struck me as odd. My parents usually preferred hosting at their place. Sam arrived with them, her expression somber as they walked through my front door. The tension was immediate and suffocating. Would anyone like coffee? I offered, trying to maintain normalcy. Let's just get to the point, Dad said, his voice uncharacteristically cold. We need to look in your spare bedroom. Confused but with nothing to hide, I led them down the hallway. What are we looking for exactly? No one answered. When I opened the door to my rarely used guest room, Sam immediately walked to the closet and knelt down, reaching behind a stack of winter blankets I kept stored there. She pulled out a small wooden box I'd never seen before. What is that? I asked, genuinely confused. Mom gasped as Sam opened it, revealing my grandfather's Rolex, Mom's diamond earrings, and the sapphire necklace, along with several other missing family items. How did you know exactly where to look? I asked Sam, the realization dawning horribly. She ignored me, turning to our parents with tears in her eyes. I didn't want to believe it. I came over last week to borrow his lawnmower and saw the box when I was looking for it in the closet. I told myself there had to be an explanation. It was a perfectly crafted lie. Sam had indeed borrowed my lawnmower the previous week, but I'd retrieved it from the garage for her. She'd never been in my spare room. She'd planted the items herself. This is insane, I said, looking from face to face. I've never seen that box before. Sam is setting me up. Stop it, Ethan, Mom said, her voice breaking. Just stop. We found the items in your house. In your closet. That I never use. Sam is the only person who's been in there. Can't you see what's happening? Dad shook his head, disappointment etched across his face. We've suspected for a while. The timing of the disappearances, your sudden questions about our finances, your resentment toward your sister. What resentment? This is crazy. I was shouting now, which only made me appear more guilty. Sam placed a comforting hand on Mom's shoulder, the picture of supportive daughter, while our mother cried. Maybe you have a problem, Ethan. Gambling debts or something? We can get you help. The perfect touch, offering the possibility of redemption while reinforcing my guilt. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I'd never noticed before, calculation behind her tears. She was enjoying this. Get out of my house, I said quietly. All of you. I didn't take anything. That box isn't mine. I would never steal from you. We found the items, Ethan, Dad said firmly. In your possession. The facts speak for themselves. They left with the box of recovered treasures, my mother sobbing, my father stone-faced, and Sam throwing me one last glance. A look of such convincing heartbreak that for a moment I almost believed her act myself. Within days, the family excommunication was complete. My parents blocked my number. Emails went unanswered. When I drove to their house, they refused to open the door. Sam's performance extended to our entire extended family. She called aunts, uncles, and cousins with embellished stories about my breakdown and betrayal. She suggested I might have addiction issues or financial problems that had driven me to steal from our parents. She positioned herself as the heartbroken sister who wanted to believe in my innocence but couldn't deny the evidence. My cousin Mark, who I'd been close with since childhood, texted, "How could you do this to your family? They gave you everything." My Aunt Susan, who had always treated me like another son, sent a card that read simply, "When you're ready to admit your problems and seek help, we'll be here." As if I were an addict in denial. The isolation was absolute. Invitations to family events stopped. Birthday cards and calls, traditions that had continued unbroken since college, suddenly ceased. My Christmas gifts were returned unopened. Photos of family gatherings appeared on social media, everyone smiling as if my absence was unremarkable. As if I'd never existed. The rejection cut deeper than I could have imagined. These people were my foundation, my history, my identity. Without them, I felt untethered, adrift in a world that suddenly made no sense. I tried everything to prove my innocence. I called repeatedly until they blocked my number. I wrote emails detailing the logical impossibility of their accusations. I sent letters explaining how and when Sam could have planted the items. I even drove to my parents' house and left a handwritten note on their doorstep, begging them to just listen to me for 5 minutes. The note was returned, torn in half, in my mailbox the next day. Christmas arrived, the first holiday season I'd ever spent alone. While scrolling through social media, I saw photos from my family's traditional gathering. Everyone was there at my parents' house, aunts, uncles, cousins, and Sam at the center of it all, raising a glass in the photo, looking appropriately subdued but carrying on bravely in my absence. The caption read, "Family is everything, even through difficult times." I shut off my phone, sat in my dark living room, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to cry. Not just for the loss of my family, but for the realization that the people I loved most in the world had never really known me at all. They had been so quick to believe the worst about me, so eager to accept Sam's version of events without question. 32 years of being the responsible, honest son had meant nothing when weighed against her tears and accusations. That night, sitting alone with my Christmas dinner of frozen pizza, I made a decision. I wouldn't spend the rest of my life begging people to believe me. If my family could discard me this easily, perhaps they weren't the people I thought they were. Perhaps it was time to build a life without them. I didn't realize then that the path back to truth had already begun, and that the consequences for Sam would extend far beyond our family dynamics. January arrived, bringing with it a new year and the deepest depression I'd ever experienced. I'd always prided myself on my emotional stability, but the complete rejection by my family left me shattered. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., replaying every interaction, wondering if I could have said or done something differently to make them believe me. My work suffered immediately. As a software developer, concentration is essential, but I found myself staring blankly at code for hours, unable to focus. My team leader noticed, of course. After I missed 2 important deadlines, she called me into her office. "What's going on, Ethan? This isn't like you." I considered lying, making up some minor personal issue, but I was tired of deception. So I told her everything. To my surprise, she listened without judgment, then gave me something no one in my family had, the benefit of the doubt. "Take some time off," she suggested. 2 weeks paid. Get your head straight. Your job will be here when you get back. Those 2 weeks might have been spent spiraling further into depression if not for Marcus, my college roommate, and the only friend who stood firmly in my corner. When everyone else in my life had either abandoned me or grown uncomfortably distant, Marcus showed up at my door with takeout and unwavering support. "I've known you for 14 years, he said simply. "You're many things, an obsessive neat freak, terrible at poker, and the most loyal person I've ever met. But you're not a thief. Especially not from your family." His certainty in my character was the lifeline I desperately needed. "You need to fight back," Marcus insisted one evening over beers in my living room. "Not by begging them to believe you, but by proving what really happened." "How?" "It's my word against Sam's, and they've made their choice. Have you considered hiring a private investigator? If Sam is stealing and pawning items, there might be a paper trail." The idea seemed extreme, even melodramatic, but I was out of options. Marcus connected me with Keith Rollins, a former police detective who now worked private cases. Gruff, methodical, and refreshingly straightforward, Keith took my case with professional detachment. "I'm not promising anything," he warned during our first meeting. "But if your sister is involved in theft, there's usually a pattern. People who steal rarely do it just once." The investigation began with basic background research. Keith ran a comprehensive financial check on Sam, revealing alarming red flags: 6 maxed-out credit cards, 2 personal loans and collections, and a credit score that had plummeted over the past year. Her income as a marketing coordinator couldn't possibly support her lifestyle. "Your sister is drowning in debt," Keith explained, showing me the reports. "Living well beyond her means. That's often motivation for theft, maintaining appearances." Next came surveillance. For 2 weeks, Keith tracked Sam's movements, documenting frequent shopping sprees at high-end stores despite her financial situation. More significantly, he photographed her visiting 3 different pawn shops across town. "She's careful," Keith noted. "Uses different shops, probably to avoid establishing a pattern at any one location." With this evidence, Keith was able to visit these pawn shops posing as a buyer looking for vintage jewelry and watches. At the second shop, he struck gold, photos of my mother's pearl earrings and a silver letter opener from my father's desk, both reported missing after my banishment. The pawn tickets showed Sam's ID had been used. She hadn't even bothered using a fake name, confident that no one would ever check. But the most damning discovery came when Keith followed Sam to a storage facility on the outskirts of Portland. Posing as a potential renter, he later confirmed she maintained a small unit there under her name. Through careful questioning of the facility manager, who remembered Sam because she visited irregularly but always appeared stressed, Keith learned she'd been renting the unit for approximately 8 months, corresponding exactly with the timeline of the thefts. "We need to see what's in that storage unit," I said when Keith reported his findings. "Legally, we can't break in," Keith reminded me. "But this is enough to take to the police if you want to file a report." I hesitated. Filing a police report meant potentially sending my sister to jail. Despite everything, that step felt irrevocable, a final betrayal of family loyalty. But then I remembered Christmas alone, my parents' refusal to even hear my side, and a complete dismantling of my life based on Sam's lies. "Let's gather more evidence first," I decided. "I want to be absolutely certain." Keith continued his investigation, discovering Sam had recently sold several items to an antique dealer across state lines, a potential federal offense if she transported stolen goods. Among the items was a description matching my grandmother's silver hairbrush, something I hadn't even known was missing. Most disturbing of all, Keith uncovered evidence that Sam had been systematically stealing mail from our parents' house, specifically financial documents and anything from banks or credit card companies. "This goes beyond pawning family heirlooms," Keith warned me. "Mail theft is a federal crime, and the pattern suggests possible identity theft or financial fraud." I sat in my living room, reviewing Keith's reports and photographs, feeling sick to my stomach. The sister I'd grown up with, built blanket forts with, shared secrets with, she was systematically destroying our family from within. And somehow, I'd been cast as the villain. As if the universe was confirming my suspicions, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Alicia, an administrative assistant from my company's HR department. "Ethan, I'm sorry to bother you during your leave, but there's something strange happening with your W-2 forms. Someone's been trying to access your tax information using your social security number, but with an incorrect password. The system flagged it as potentially fraudulent activity." A cold realization washed over me. This wasn't just about jewelry and watches. Sam was stealing identities, my identity, possibly our parents' too. This had escalated far beyond what I'd imagined. The next day, Keith confirmed my worst fears. Using contacts at the county records office, he discovered recent credit inquiries under my name that I hadn't authorized. Someone had attempted to open 3 new credit cards using my social security number. "Your sister isn't just a thief," Keith said gravely. "She's committing identity fraud. And given the mail theft from your parents' house, I'd bet good money she's doing the same to them." That night, I made one of the hardest decisions of my life. Family loyalty had its limits. Sam's actions weren't just hurting me, she was potentially destroying our parents' financial security, all while positioning herself as their supportive daughter. It was time to go to the authorities. Not just for justice for myself, but to protect my parents from what was coming. Because something told me we'd only discovered the tip of the iceberg. The decision to report my own sister to authorities wasn't taken lightly. I spent a sleepless night weighing every option, wondering if there was another way to resolve this without legal consequences. By morning, I knew there wasn't. Sam's actions had escalated from family theft to serious financial crimes. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be fixed with a conversation, if our parents would even agree to have one with me. I met with Detective Laura Simmons at the Portland Police Department, bringing Keith's comprehensive file detailing everything we'd discovered. Detective Simmons reviewed the evidence with professional detachment, occasionally looking up to ask clarifying questions. When she reached the documentation about mail theft and identity fraud, her expression grew more serious. "Mr. Mitchell, what you're describing goes beyond local jurisdiction. Mail theft is a federal offense, and the identity fraud crosses state lines. We'll need to involve federal authorities." "Whatever it takes," I said, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. "I just want the truth to come out." Detective Simmons assured me they would investigate thoroughly, but warned it might take time. Financial crimes require careful documentation and coordination between agencies. I left the police station feeling both relieved and terrified. There was no turning back now. 2 weeks passed with no updates. I returned to work, trying to rebuild some normalcy in my life. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Detective Simmons called. "Mr. Mitchell, we've found something significant. Our financial crimes unit discovered multiple fraudulent tax returns filed using your parents' information." "Tax returns?" I echoed, confused. "Yes. It appears your sister has been filing false returns in your parents' names for the past 3 years, diverting refunds to accounts under her control. We've contacted the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They're taking over the case." The involvement of IRS criminal investigators shifted everything into high gear. Within days, I was sitting across from Special Agent James Rodriguez, explaining the family dynamics that had allowed Sam's crimes to go undetected for so long. Unfortunately, we see this pattern often, Agent Rodriguez explained. Family members are ideal targets for identity theft because there's already a foundation of trust and access to personal information. The scope of Sam's scheme, once uncovered, was staggering. She hadn't just stolen family heirlooms to pawn for quick cash. For 3 years, she had been systematically stealing our parents' identities to file fraudulent tax returns, claiming excessive deductions and generating substantial refunds that were routed to prepaid debit cards she controlled. We've documented over $200,000 in fraudulent returns, Agent Rodriguez informed me. She created elaborate fake businesses and charitable donations in your parents' names to generate the refunds. Even more disturbing, she'd recently started the same process with my information, though she'd been caught before successfully filing returns in my name. The technical term is stolen identity refund fraud, the agent explained. It's one of the fastest-growing financial crimes we investigate. I felt physically ill. My parents don't know any of this, do they? Not yet. But we'll be contacting them today. Tax fraud of this magnitude carries serious penalties. They'll need to cooperate with our investigation to demonstrate they weren't involved. The thought of my parents, particularly my father, the accountant who prided himself on meticulous record-keeping, learning they'd been victims of tax fraud by their own daughter was almost too painful to contemplate. Despite everything they'd put me through, I didn't want them to face this kind of devastation. Can I be there when you tell them? I asked impulsively. Agent Rodriguez shook his head. That wouldn't be appropriate for an official notification. But nothing prevents you from visiting them afterward. That afternoon, I parked down the street from my parents' house, watching as 2 agents approached their door. Even from a distance, I could see my mother's confusion turn to shock as she invited them inside. I sat there for nearly 3 hours, wondering what was happening within those walls, imagining my parents' world collapsing just as mine had months earlier. Finally, the agents emerged. My father stood in the doorway, looking suddenly aged and diminished. My mother wasn't visible. The agents spoke briefly with him before departing, leaving him staring after their car with the dazed expression of someone whose reality had just been fundamentally altered. I wanted to go to them then, to offer support despite everything, but something held me back. This wasn't the moment. They needed time to process, to come to terms with what their golden child had done. I learned later through Keith, who maintained contact with Detective Simmons, that the IRS agents had presented my parents with irrefutable evidence of Sam's crimes. Documents bearing forged signatures. Bank records showing refund deposits. Surveillance photos from banks where she'd collected funds. The careful facade she'd constructed had crumbled completely in the face of federal investigation. Sam's initial response was predictable, vehement denial followed by tears and accusations. She claimed I was framing her out of jealousy, that I'd somehow orchestrated this elaborate scheme to ruin her. But the evidence was overwhelming and continued to mount as investigators dug deeper into her finances. The breaking point came when agents executed a search warrant on her apartment and storage unit, discovering not only more stolen family items but also documents detailing accounts opened in our parents' names, credit cards she'd obtained fraudulently, and perhaps most damning, a notebook outlining which family members' identities were safest to use for various schemes. Confronted with this evidence and facing multiple federal charges, Sam finally confessed. She admitted to stealing and pawning family valuables, using the proceeds to maintain her lifestyle while drowning in debt. She confessed to the tax fraud scheme, explaining how she'd intercepted mail and created elaborate documentation to support false returns. She even admitted to planting items in my home to frame me when she feared I was growing suspicious. The confession was comprehensive and devastating. My sister hadn't just committed crimes of opportunity. She had systematically targeted her own family in a years-long fraud scheme, destroying relationships and trust with calculated precision. Keith called to tell me about the confession late one evening. She's cooperating now, hoping for leniency. The prosecutors are considering a plea deal given the extent of her cooperation. I absorbed this information numbly, feeling no satisfaction in being vindicated. There was only sadness for what our family had become, for the sister I'd lost long before I realized she was gone. The next morning, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months. My mother was calling. With shaking hands, I answered. "Ethan?" Her voice was small, broken. "We need to talk." My mother's voice on the phone that morning was almost unrecognizable, hoarse from crying, stripped of the confidence I'd always associated with her. That small, vulnerable Ethan carried the weight of months of misplaced blame and the fresh shock of betrayal by her daughter. "We need to talk," she repeated when I didn't immediately respond. "Please." Part of me wanted to refuse, to let her experience even a fraction of the isolation I'd endured. But revenge had never been my goal. Truth had. "I'll come over this afternoon," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Walking up to my parents' front door hours later felt surreal, like visiting a place from a half-forgotten dream. My father opened it before I could knock, looking years older than when I'd last seen him. The confident accountant had been replaced by a haunted, diminished version of himself. "Son," he said, the word catching in his throat. He reached out as if to embrace me, then seemed to think better of it, his hand falling awkwardly to his side. My mother waited in the living room, perched rigidly on the edge of the sofa where we'd spent countless family evenings. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usually perfect hair unkempt. "Thank you for coming," she said formally, as if I were a stranger. In many ways, we had become strangers. What followed was an excruciating conversation filled with awkward pauses and halting apologies. They took turns explaining how they should have asked more questions, and never should have jumped to conclusions. We were blind when it came to Sam, my father admitted, staring at his clasped hands. "We always have been." Their explanations felt hollow, their excuses inadequate. They had chosen to believe the worst about me without investigation, without consideration of my lifelong character. They had discarded me with stunning ease. "The agents showed us everything," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "The tax fraud, the identity theft, the storage unit full of our things. How could she do this to us? To you?" I noticed the order of her concern, to them first, then me as an afterthought. "The same question I asked myself every day for months," I replied evenly. "How could my family believe I'd steal from them? How could they cut me off without even allowing me to defend myself?" My father winced. "We were wrong, Ethan. Terribly wrong. I've never been so ashamed of myself." They described their shock at learning the extent of Sam's deception. The IRS investigation had revealed not just tax fraud but a comprehensive scheme spanning years. My parents now faced potential financial ruin from IRS penalties and the necessity of filing amended returns for multiple years. "They're saying we might owe over $100,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest," my father explained, the accountant in him resurfacing briefly. "Our retirement savings." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The comfortable retirement they'd planned had evaporated overnight. "We're cooperating fully with the investigation," my mother assured me, as if seeking my approval. "Trying to prove we weren't involved in her schemes." I nodded, still maintaining emotional distance. "That's the right thing to do." As our uncomfortable conversation continued, my phone began buzzing with texts and calls from family members who had previously shunned me. My Aunt Susan wanted to check in. Cousin Mark asked if we could grab a beer and talk. Uncle David expressed how terrible he felt about the misunderstanding. Word had spread quickly through the family grapevine. Sam's arrest and the federal investigation were impossible to hide, and my innocence was now irrefutable. Everyone wanted to make amends, to re-establish connections as if the past months of rejection had been a minor miscommunication rather than a fundamental betrayal. Over the following weeks, the reconciliation attempts intensified. My parents called daily, their desperation growing as they faced not only emotional devastation but also practical consequences of Sam's actions. They needed help navigating the complex legal aftermath, understanding IRS documents, and managing their suddenly precarious finances. "We don't know who else to turn to," my father admitted during one call. "You're the only one who understands what happened." The irony wasn't lost on me. After months of being family pariah, I was now their lifeline. Extended family members made increasingly direct overtures. My Aunt Susan invited me to Sunday dinner, just like old times. Cousins suggested holiday plans, now that everything's cleared up. Even my grandmother, who had perhaps been the most hurtful in her rejection, sent a handwritten letter expressing how she'd always known in her heart I couldn't have done what I was accused of, despite having told me directly that I was no longer welcome at her home. Their attempts at reconciliation followed a predictable pattern, minimizing what had happened, emphasizing family bonds that can withstand anything, and applying subtle pressure to resume normal relations immediately. Few offered genuine apologies acknowledging the depth of their betrayal. Instead, they spoke of moving forward and putting this behind us. 6 weeks after my parents' initial call, they requested a family meeting at their house, the same kind of meeting that had been used to ambush and condemn me. This time, various aunts, uncles, and cousins were present, creating a gathering that felt more like an intervention than a reconciliation. "We need to be a family again," my mother announced, looking around the room. "Ethan needs our support after everything he's been through." I noticed the framing, not that they needed my forgiveness, but that I needed their support. As if their presence in my life was the solution rather than the original problem. My Uncle David raised his glass in an impromptu toast. "To family sticking together through thick and thin." I remained silent, observing these people who had rejected me so completely now performing rehearsed rituals of reunion. Their eagerness to resume normal relations without addressing the fundamental breach of trust was telling. This wasn't about making amends, it was about making themselves feel better. When I finally spoke, the room fell uncomfortably quiet. "I appreciate everyone coming today," I began carefully. "But I need to be clear about something. What happened wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was a choice, multiple choices, made by each of you. You chose to believe the worst about me without evidence. You chose to cut me out of your lives without allowing me to defend myself. You chose silence and rejection when I reached out repeatedly." My mother tried to interrupt, but I continued. "I'm not saying I can't forgive those choices. But I am saying that forgiveness doesn't mean immediate restoration of trust. It doesn't mean we pretend it never happened. And it certainly doesn't mean I'll allow myself to be vulnerable to that kind of rejection again." The discomfort in the room was palpable. This wasn't the script they'd expected, the grateful prodigal welcomed back into the fold. I was establishing boundaries, and boundaries were something my family had never navigated well. "What are you saying, Ethan?" my father asked. "That you don't want to be part of this family anymore?" "I'm saying that being part of this family needs to mean something different than it did before. I'm saying I need time and space to decide what relationship I want with each of you individually. And I'm saying that reconciliation requires more than just acknowledging you were wrong, it requires understanding why what happened was so devastating." My words hung in the air, challenging the comfortable narrative they'd constructed. This wasn't the quick, painless reunion they'd hoped for. This was the beginning of a longer, more difficult process that would require genuine introspection rather than performative remorse. As I looked around at their faces, some confused, others defensive, a few showing dawning comprehension, I realized that the family I'd longed to return to didn't exist anymore. Perhaps it never had. What remained was a group of flawed individuals with whom I shared history and DNA, but whose unconditional love had proven shockingly conditional. I would build relationships with them again, selectively, carefully, on new terms. But the blind trust and automatic loyalty that had defined my approach to family was gone forever. The journey toward healing began with therapy, something I'd never considered before this ordeal. Marcus had gently suggested it for months, but I'd resisted, clinging to the self-reliance that had defined me for so long. Finally, after that tense family gathering, I made the call. Dr. Rachel Winters specialized in family trauma and betrayal. In our first session, she asked a question that stopped me cold. Who are you without your family's definition of you? I had no ready answer. For 32 years, I'd been Ethan the reliable one, Ethan the responsible son, Ethan who could be counted on. When that identity was ripped away, what remained? That's what we're going to discover, Dr. Winters said with quiet confidence. Our weekly sessions became an anchor in the chaos. We explored not just the recent betrayal but the lifetime of family dynamics that had preceded it, the golden child syndrome that had elevated Sam, the emotional parentification that had burdened me with being the steady one, the conditional approval that had shaped my choices. Healing isn't just about processing what happened with your sister's accusations, Dr. Winters explained. It's about understanding the system that made it possible. Meanwhile, the legal consequences of Sam's actions continued to unfold. She accepted a plea deal, agreeing to full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. She would serve 18 months in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release, with court-ordered restitution payments to our parents. I made the difficult decision to help my parents navigate the legal and financial aftermath without fully reconciling with them emotionally. It was a delicate balance, offering practical support while maintaining the boundaries I needed for my own well-being. You can support them without surrendering your autonomy, Dr. Winters reassured me during a particularly difficult week. Compassion doesn't require complete trust. My father and I established a weekly meeting to review their financial situation and develop strategies for dealing with the IRS penalties. These sessions were initially stilted and formal, focused exclusively on practical matters. But gradually, as weeks turned to months, moments of genuine connection began to emerge between spreadsheets and tax forms. I was wrong about so many things, he admitted one evening as we finished reviewing their payment plan. Not just about you and Sam. About what makes a family strong. I thought it was loyalty at all costs. Now I think maybe it's honesty, even when it's difficult. It was the most insight I'd ever heard from my father, a man who'd spent his life hiding behind numbers and certainties. I recognized the courage it took him to acknowledge this transformation. My mother's journey was different, more complicated. Her identity had been so wrapped up in Sam, in the daughter who reflected her own youthful beauty and social grace. The betrayal cut deeper for her, challenging not just her judgment but her very sense of self. I don't know how to be a mother to either of you anymore, she confessed during a rare moment of vulnerability. I failed you both so completely. You didn't fail Sam by trusting her, I said after careful consideration. And you don't need to be perfect to be my mother. You just need to see me, really see me, instead of who you think I should be. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was a doorway that might eventually lead there. With extended family, I was more selective. Some relationships I chose not to rebuild at all, those who had been particularly cruel in their rejection or especially superficial in their attempts to reconcile. Others I allowed back into my life gradually, beginning with small interactions and measuring their sincerity. My cousin Mark proved genuinely remorseful, admitting he'd been influenced by Sam's manipulation but ultimately responsible for his own choices. I should have known better, he said simply. You've never been anything but straight with me. His honesty earned him a place in my reconstructed life. We began meeting monthly for dinner, rebuilding our connection on new, more authentic ground. Sam and I had no contact during her incarceration. She sent letters that I chose not to read, left voicemails I deleted unheard. Perhaps someday I would be ready to hear her explanations or apologies, but that day hadn't yet arrived. My healing couldn't depend on her remorse. Professional therapy wasn't my only path to recovery. I found unexpected solace in community service, volunteering at a financial literacy program for low-income families. Teaching others how to protect themselves from fraud and manage resources responsibly gave purpose to my experience. Each person I helped represented a small reclamation of meaning from the chaos Sam had created. I also focused on expanding my social circle beyond family connections. I joined a hiking group, took cooking classes, and accepted more invitations from colleagues. Slowly, I built a community based on shared interests and mutual respect rather than obligation or history. These new relationships taught me an important distinction: trust isn't an all-or-nothing proposition. It's earned incrementally, tested repeatedly, and always subject to revision based on actions rather than words. I learned to watch what people did rather than simply believing what they said, a lesson that served me in every area of life. As the one-year anniversary of my family's rejection approached, I found myself in a surprisingly good place. My career had rebounded, with a promotion to development team lead. My social life was richer and more diverse than ever before. Most importantly, I had developed a relationship with myself that didn't depend on external validation. The family dynamic had permanently shifted. Holiday gatherings were smaller, more intentional events rather than obligatory performances. Some traditions died, others were reinvented. My parents sold their too-large house, downsizing to accommodate their new financial reality, a change that, ironically, seemed to lift a burden from them both. "We spent so many years maintaining appearances," my father reflected as we packed books from his home office. "Maybe this is actually closer to who we were meant to be." The wisdom I gained through this ordeal wasn't what I would have chosen, but it was valuable nonetheless. I learned that family isn't guaranteed simply by birth, it's earned through actions, built on respect and reciprocity. I discovered that loyalty without accountability becomes toxic, enabling harm rather than preventing it. And I came to understand that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it simply means releasing yourself from the burden of resentment, while maintaining necessary distance. Most importantly, I learned that my worth wasn't dependent on others' perception. The people who had known me longest had failed to see me clearly, but that didn't diminish who I was. Their rejection said more about their limitations than my value. As I write this, I'm still navigating what family means in the aftermath of betrayal. Some days bring progress, others remind me how much healing remains. But I'm no longer defined by what was taken from me. Instead, I'm building something new, relationships based on choice rather than obligation, trust earned through actions rather than assumed through blood. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after a profound betrayal? How did you decide which relationships were worth salvaging and which needed to end? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. Remember to like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe for more content about navigating family dynamics, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing in your truth matters, even when those closest to you refuse to see it. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into.